Well, hey guys, how you doing? Hope you're doing well when you watch this video. This video is designed for a 7th grade life science class. In the video, I'm going to be covering these objectives. I hope to describe how natural selection leads to change over time. So we're going to dive into natural selection in this video, explain that process, and then also briefly explain how genes and mutations and the environment lead to natural selection, okay? So we've been talking about Darwin. Darwin, English naturalist, went on this 5-year journey, and he was started to, ask questions. Like, how did species change? How did they develop these adaptations? What drove this process? What was driving this selection? He was kind of thinking like, well, it seems like organisms are specifically adapted to where they're living. What was driving this? He was looking for a mechanism. You can see it's highlighted in yellow. I'm highlighting some of your vocabulary words. But a mechanism is the natural process by which something takes place. So he was trying to figure out what mechanism was driving this. Darwin actually bred pigeons. He actually helped develop the fantail pigeon right here. But all of these pigeons, and even the silky fantail, which came from the fantail, all of these pigeons are from the rock pigeon. You wouldn't think that. You would think, wow, they're completely different. But Darwin knew through artificial selection and selective breeding that you could develop certain traits. You could select for certain traits and change how the organism looks over time. I hope you like veggies. Eating at home a lot these days, of course. No one's really going out too much these days. But all of these plants, kohlrabi, I've never had it. They use it in cooking shows a lot. Ella Grace and I love watching cooking shows. My whole family does. Kale, Brussels sprouts with bacon, fantastic. A little honey, oh, delicious. Cabbage, cauliflower mashed potatoes on point. I don't know if you ever had that. Broccoli, of course, is extremely healthy for you. But all of those came from a wild mustard plant. But through generations, humans were specifically looking for specific traits, and they were selecting those traits every breeding generation. And so therefore, they've developed all these varieties of vegetables from a wild mustard plant. So this is artificial selection. The breeding of organisms for desired characteristics is called selective breeding. You're selecting what you want to breed and pass those traits on. Humans are doing this. So Darwin realized that changes caused by selective breeding were much like changes caused by natural selection. He's like, well, if humans can selectively breed, couldn't nature as well due to chance? And so this is a great example right here. I'll take the webcam away, but this is a great example right here of natural selection. The tortoises on the Galapagos Islands. Darwin noticed that they are different, but they have similar characteristics. But the dome tortoise is on Isabella, and really large shell for protection. On Santiago, there is intermediate tortoise. The shell shape is between the dome and the saddleback. And then on Espanola, there is the saddleback tortoise, which means there's a large space. What drove this selection? Some questions that you could think about is, what could you logically ask? Well, why do the tortoises look different? How did they even get to the islands in the first place, right? I mean, the islands, if you think about creation or according to evolution, everything just kind of, how did they even get there? What could have caused varieties of one kind of tortoise to become different species? But the most important question for you to kind of think about is, what factor in the environment determined the shape of these tortoise shells? What factor? And I want to go back to the picture, but the factor that drove this is vegetation, the environment. On Isabella, there's a lot of vegetation, and so therefore fitness is related to protection. So a larger shell, you're more fit because you're protected from organisms that could harm you. On Santiago, there is intermediate. There's some low vegetation, but also some higher vegetation. So you see kind of middle ground. You need some protection, but you also need to be able to stretch your neck and find the vegetation. On Espanola, all the vegetation is really high. So what Darwin realized is that if you look like the dome tortoise, you're not fit in that environment. You're not going to survive and reproduce as well as the saddleback tortoise, because the saddleback tortoise can reach those high plants. And so Darwin was thinking about these processes and these thoughts. And so Darwin saw the fossils. Cuvier was another guy who's like a paleontologist. And change happened for many, between the past and now. Change is happening slowly. There's that uniformitarian word again. what processes that happened in the past are happening now as well. And then Hutton gradualism takes a lot of time to see the changes that we see on the planet. So Darwin's like, well, if it took a lot of time for the Earth to form and look the way it does now, organisms also had a lot of time to change how they look. So he was thinking, okay, it's going to take a long time for these organisms to change what they look like. So Darwin's natural selection. So a couple of things. This is a very important slide. I would focus on it. A couple of things. So Darwin was basically saying we see what artificial selection by man can do by selectively breeding. After all, there's a constant, here we go, struggle for survival. That's a huge phrase you need to know because of population growth and limited resources. And certainly each kind can produce many varieties. Therefore, so all these young are produced in organisms. Plants, animals, all sorts of different organisms. But there's a struggle to survive. There's limited resources, limited space, limited food, limited water, limited mates. And so there's a struggle for survival. I don't know if you've ever felt like life is hard, but life is hard. It's hard to live, especially if you're out in the wild, right? We are blessed to have a roof over our heads and food that we can go buy. But what if you were just living out in the wilderness, making your own shelter, finding your own food, hunter-gatherer like our ancestors? That's extremely challenging. So there's a struggle for survival. Therefore, there will be a survival of the fittest. What does it mean to be fit? I'm not talking about muscle mass or the ability to run long distances. I'm talking about best adapted for the environment. Given enough generations and the right trait combinations, organisms that seem designed for their environment, so Darwin didn't believe in creation, remember, will simply result from natural processes. So again, all of this is naturalism. All this is explaining life away from God, trying to explain it through naturalistic processes. And so Darwin, let me take off the writing here. So Darwin was thinking, okay, natural selection, naturalism. From a Christian standpoint, are natural selection and evolution the same thing? Well, according to Christians, to many Christians, the answer is no. We see natural selection. There is no argument about it. The virus that we're fighting right now around the planet, that's due to change. This virus has changed, evolved, and now it's infecting humans now. And so we see that. But we also see examples like this. And I hope you're not eating when you're watching this slide. I'm sorry if you were. It's a rough time to be eating. But this is very important to understand. Darwin saw the finches on the Galapagos, the different beaks, and they were specifically designed for a certain food. Skin color. We see all this different skin color in the human race. That's natural selection just based upon UV and where our heritage is from. Genetic, this is a virus. The DNA changes. We see that right now with COVID-19. This virus hasn't always been around. Flu changes from year to year. That's why you get different flu shot. But why in the world am I showing you this disgusting picture? Well, this is actually MRSA. MRSA is a superbug, which basically means it's very hard to kill if you get infected with it. It's methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. If you ever heard of a staph infection, this is just like an amped up on steroid staph infection. And so, but where did it come from? Well, it came through natural selection. We've been using these antibiotics. Most doctors would say irresponsibly. We take antibiotics for everything. We even put them in our livestock and in our chickens for 10, 20, 30 years before everybody was like, hey, listen, this is not good. Let's stop this. And so now you see antibiotic-free chicken when you buy chicken. But we abuse antibiotics. And so therefore, through just chance, some bacteria became super advanced. They became resistant to antibiotics. So just imagine what that would feel like, right? You're sick. You're infected by a bacterium. It's invading your body. You go to the hospital and they give you a drug and it doesn't work. They give you another drug and it doesn't work. And so they're trying to, and then they go to like these really old, dangerous antibiotics. Maybe these will work. And so just imagine how scary that would be. But we see this. Natural selection does occur. Evolution on a small scale does occur. So Darwin didn't believe in creation. He was saying everything is due to chance. Evolution is directly based on chance. And so natural selection, a big key word for this lesson. So you need to be able to explain it. And so in every species, so I'm just going to explain it to you on this slide. In every species, and this is a little funny graphic, hurts me. I'm a gamer too. I've been playing, well, not much lately, but a little bit. It's all right. But in every species, more young are produced than can remain alive. So more young are produced. They will compete for resources like food, shelter, water, mates, space. In every species, some individuals compete more efficiently. Why is that? They're stronger, they're more able to survive, but not necessarily strength. I'm not talking about like muscle mass here. I'm talking about adaptations. Maybe they blend in better. Maybe they can conserve oxygen at a different rate. Maybe they can metabolize a certain food better. And so those individuals that have traits to allow them to win will reproduce and pass on those traits to their offspring. So only organisms best suited to survive will reproduce, and that is survival of the fittest. So natural selection occurs in any situation in which more individuals are born than can survive. So there's a struggle, and the organisms compete. Natural variation, mutations, we're about to talk a little bit more about them in a second, but where does all this change come from? It comes from DNA. Affects the ability to survive and reproduce. So there's the variation, and those are the adaptations that we already kind of talked about. And fitness varies, so there's a different fitness levels between organisms, and therefore there's differential reproductive success. The organisms that are best suited for the environment will reproduce successfully and pass those genes on to the next generation. Therefore, those successful genes specific to each environment will go up in number. You can take this, for example, with loggerhead sea turtles. We see this on Florida beaches. I forgot what time of the year it is. Probably should have known that before I said that, but it's okay. I forgot. I think it's spring, winter, and anyways, that's not the point. The point is loggerhead sea turtles. You're not supposed to touch them, of course. Let them go. But they're birth and they're hatchlings, and they try to make it to the sea. And to see an adult sea turtle is a very rare thing. There's a video on YouTube by Ted Ed, and it's like 2 out of 1,000 make it or something like that. It's crazy, right? But what are some of the variations that would enable a turtle to survive when it's just a hatchling? Because remember, you're dealing with predators. You're very vulnerable. The surf is dangerous. Getting lost, right? So first off, if you have stronger muscles, you can make it to the sea quicker. That's a variation. You know where the sea is. Most of them already kind of have this innate, hearing and the ability to find the sea. But what if you go the wrong way? So that would be a bad choice. Also, weakness and the inability to climb out of the sand. So all those would be variations that would allow them to survive. But not only that, it's also due to chance. Maybe a predator just didn't, pick you, and it picked the person right by you, the loggerhead turtle right by you. So it's also due to chance. A great example of natural selection is this. It's called the peppered moth story. Basically, in England, before the Industrial Revolution, all the peppered moths, well, the majority of them, I shouldn't say all, the majority of them were white, blending in with the lichens on the trees. But the Industrial Revolution happened, all this, pollution is being, poured into the environment from these factories. And so what happened is the lichens died and the trees started turning black. If you were a bird, which one is easier to see? This one or that one? And obviously, it's not a trick question. This is super easy to see, right? Like that's standing out very, clearly. And so what happened was the population changed. Before the Industrial Revolution, there was a small percentage of black peppered moths. But after the Industrial Revolution, what do you think happened to the population? It switched. So white peppered moths went down because they were getting eaten. They were not passing those genes on. Black peppered moths went up because they weren't getting eaten and they were surviving. And so their fitness levels changed based upon the environment. Christians like to argue that this isn't one species changing to a different species. We're still within the peppered moth kind, right? The pepper moth is still a pepper moth, but even so, it is an example of natural selection. So this is from a Christian website, Answers in Genesis. Biological evolution requires an increase in information that results in new kinds of living things. So remember, if you don't have anything absolute to stand on, everything is relative. What works for me is what might not work for you. What's my truth? You hear a lot of people saying, what's my truth? Well, if we were created by God, we have a creator and we have to answer to that creator. If everything is due to chance and randomness, you could get into so many ethical conversations here, philosophical conversations, but basically, what makes something right for you doesn't necessarily make that right for me. That's why we have laws, but laws change, right? And so laws are based upon man. So really, everything is relative. What works for you may not work for me. And it's really, you can have some really interesting conversations in other classes about that. So this is also from Answers in Genesis. And you can see here, created kinds. So we don't believe that God created every single species. That's not what Genesis says. Genesis says God created kinds. So perhaps you had an ancient cat kind. Some of y'all have cats. I'm kind of allergic. One time I walked into a house that had like 10 cats and it was like really, really bad. But yeah, the lion, the cheetah, the jaguar, or the jaguar, depending upon where you're from. And those are all possible, you know, species that came from the original cat kind. So evolutionary theory in a nutshell, I'm not going to go over this, but if you want to pause the video, you can kind of read over that slide. It is kind of summarizing what evolution is. So macroevolution, this is Christian concepts here. Christianity teaches that there is macroevolution and microevolution. Macroevolution is basically this Darwinian evolution. We all came from one single-celled organism, and everything is related to each other because life is all interconnected and there's a unity of life. Molecules of man. Some Christians like to say this whole goo to you macroevolution. We came from primordial soup. Microevolution, we believe, is observed. So this is change within a kind. So Darwin's finches are microevolution. Industrial melanism, which is basically, the change in pepper moths. Insects developing resistance. We could also say bacteria developing resistance. Viruses changing. Microevolution, we do see this. There's no way around it. And so we do see changes within a kind. So where does all this change come from? It comes from DNA. We already talked about DNA. We did that strawberry lab where we got strawberry everywhere, but we isolated DNA. But yeah, DNA is the foundation of all this because what you look like, what predators possibly could see, your muscle mass, how you metabolize, all that's based on the code. And the code, the blueprint of you, is DNA. And so mutations lead to all this change. So that's another vocabulary word. So mutations, they are changes within DNA, variations. So for example, skin color, right? I have different DNA than someone who is really lighter, Ireland, or someone's, darker Middle East or Africa. We all have different DNA based upon our heritage and how much UV light was around for our ancestors. That's all it's based on. But we have variations. I have brown hair, not curly. You may have curly hair. Variations. So variations are based upon mutations. For a Christian, though, we would argue it doesn't produce all these new levels of information. Remember, to go from a single-celled organism to you, we're talking about adding billions of base pairs successfully, which means arranged to make working proteins. The probability of this is astronomically low, crazy low. Some Christian apologetics, which means they defend the faith, have actually argued it takes more faith to believe in random chance creating this beautiful planet and all the life that we see than God. And so research shows no good example of beneficial information gaining mutations. Very few mutations are beneficial. And so what evolution argues is, well, in order to get all these beneficial mutations, we need millions and millions and millions and millions of years. And so that's what they believe. So this is an example of mutation. This is a Hox gene. I'm not going to talk about Hox genes here. That's a high school concept. But nonetheless, there's a mutation. And where the antenna should be, you now see legs based upon mutation. This is actually from an American scientist. New mutations don't create new species. They create offspring. So what exactly are mutations? I'm going to take you a little bit more in detail about mutations than your book does, but mutations are changes within DNA. I give you the Spider-Man and the Flash because their origin stories are DNA related. So mutations, changes in the DNA strand. We're going to take 2 sentences here and learn this. Hi, I'm a human named Harry. I like to eat beans. I don't know if you like beans, refried beans, black beans, green beans, whatever. Point mutations. 1 letter changes. 1 letter. So for example, I'm a human named Larry. Okay. Most of the time, point mutations, they can be really dangerous, like sickle cell anemia, but most of the time they're neutral. They don't really change or do anything. The next type of mutation is, let me cross that out. Okay. Point mutations. Hi, I'm the human named Larry. Now, point mutations are mutations where 1 letter changes. Sometimes, though, it might produce a whole, won't even produce a word, which could be an issue. If the letters, we're trying to make sense of the letters in DNA, again, this is an analogy to English, but query, that's not, I don't even know how you would say that. That's not a decent word. So sometimes point mutations can be dangerous. An inversion mutation actually flips the DNA. So it would be like taking the second sentence and spelling it backwards. Hi, I'm the human named Harry Snob Tai Aut Equal I. I think I did that right. Obviously can cause serious harm, right? That makes no sense, and the cell's information is now completely messed up. An insertion mutation inserts DNA into a code. Hi, I'm a human named Harry. I like to buff eat beans. That doesn't, usually that doesn't make sense. That sentence would usually that causes a protein to lose function as well. And then a deletion mutation is extremely dangerous. We see this sometimes in cystic fibrosis. I'm a what? We don't even know. We don't even know what to do with this sentence. And sometimes that happens with cells as well. And so evolution requires speciation. Evolution requires one species to change into a different species, not local adaptations and differentiation of population. So that's a Christian argument as well. So let's just review briefly. A variation is a slight difference in an inherited trait. Those variations are based on DNA. Genetic changes lead to this. Natural selection, of course, more young are produced and can survive. There's a struggle for survival. They will compete, and the most fit ones will win, live, and pass those genes on to the next generation. Natural selection explains how populations change as their environments change. So, for example, reproduction, tortoises, right? The food's high. You can see how the vegetation is high in this graphic from your book or from an older book, a life science book. Population tortoises produces many offspring. However, the tortoises that have the longer necks that can reach the food, get more nutrients, they're more able to survive and reproduce. They compete more efficiently, and therefore they pass those genes on, and nature selects long necks for that specific environment. So I really hope this was helpful. Natural selection, it's an interesting topic. Please let me know if you have any questions. Until next time, guys, I hope you and your family are well. Trust in God, hope in Him. He loves you so much. I'll talk to you later.